So if you're marketing a brand, you can no longer just put your marketing campaign on a platform with a very transactional message, buy this now, etc., and hope that the consumers, your audiences are going to say, oh, I love this, I'm going to buy it. There needs to be a two-way kind of interaction.
Exactly.
It needs to be rooted in what is the community of my consumers interested in today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Shant Oknayan. Shant, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So, guys, for people who don't know, Shant is the Global VP of Business at ByteDance and TikTok. And what we wanted to talk to you about today, Shant, is more like your journey. You've been working at all the top, tech companies in the world. You've dabbled in entrepreneurship with the Glam Box too. But now you're, running TikTok and leading the global business for it. So what we wanted to understand today is what's going on in the space right now. What are the things that are coming up? How has social media been adapting since you joined? Because you've been there for a while now too. And dive into a little more bits and pieces. But before we get into all of that, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Well, as you rightly mentioned, I've been working on building platforms over the last 15 years. I'm currently at TikTok. Prior to that, I was at Facebook, now Meta. And before that, I was at Google. And in a previous life, I was a management consultant. I think you were asking on the journey and the different pivots that I've made over the years. There was one fundamental kind of question that I always had, which is, what am I solving for? So every one of those moves was very intentional. Just to give you a bit of a chronological background. Yeah. Born and raised in Italy of Armenian origin, parents hail from the Middle East. When I decided to go to university, the logic there was, I'm good at maths and physics. I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but my role models seem to be engineers as well. Why don't I do engineering? And as I was thinking about my first job, I'm like, what would give me the broadest exposure to different industries, different mindsets, and where can I make use of my skills learned as an engineer? And that's how I stumbled onto consulting. And while at consulting, I then decided to go to grad school. And the logic around that choice was which grad school, which business school is going to give me the intersection of business and technology. And I ended up going to MIT. And from there, it was, okay, where do I want to restart my career? I want to do projects that are growth related. I want to do things that are related to the digital economy. This was the mid-2000s. And I want to do that in a town that is by the beach. And so I landed in Dubai.
Doing this
big, fantastic choice, 19 years and counting. And so I ended up doing big digital transformation programs for governments. And while there, Google approached me and said, look, we're looking to build in the region. We need a head of strategy. And I said, let me put my hand where my mouth is. I've been consulting on digital. Let me go work for a digital giant. So that was a pivot there.
Okay.
And from there, founded a startup. The logic being I want to build something with friends. Glambox originated from there. And then Facebook came along and said, we're building in the region. And I said, okay, where's user behavior going? It's going from search and intentionally and explicitly looking for information to discovering information from social circles. So like social media seems to be the growth trend, moved to Facebook. And then ultimately TikTok came knocking on my door and said, we're looking to build in the region. And again, I had that question, what am I solving for? In that case, it was relevance. I'd worked for Google in the search kind of world. I'd worked at Facebook in the social media world. And TikTok came along and there was a paradigm shift in the way content is created and consumed. And I'm sure we'll talk about that with the content graph. And I said, why don't I solve for relevance and continue my journey of where digital media is evolving? Let me evolve with it. So in a nutshell, kind of that's been my thread. And the common denominator across all of that has been, what am I solving for?
When I was doing my research, I really love that question because I think it helps get clarity on maybe direction or where you want to go. And like you said, engineering background, moved to consulting, very common story that I've heard. I had one of the heads of the consulting firms on my podcast recently, and he told me, Khalid, a lot of engineers go into consulting because, to your point, you want to get into a field, but you're not sure which field you want to get into. And you obviously had a passion for tech and business, so that's where your experience was. I'm curious, how was it to start, because you worked at all the big companies on I guess I would call it client side, versus when you were a consultant on the agency side. What was the difference when how you were advising from an outside perspective to the companies, and then when you became part of these agencies, what surprised you that things work a little bit differently once you get on the inside?
Very interesting question. So the aha moment I had when I joined the digital platforms is, from the outside in, they look very idealistic, grand kind of vision, mission driven, which is all true, right? Google's mission at the time was to make information useful and accessible to everyone. Facebook's was to give people the power to share and create community. From the inside, it's very much a fact-based, scientifically led organization. So those lofty big ideas that you're exposed to as a user, or maybe from an outsider perspective, on the inside, things are driven in a very structured and systematic manner. And I guess that's potentially kind of the secret sauce as to why they're so successful. Everything is rooted in data. Everything is rooted in facts. Decisions are made accordingly. So while from the outside it looks like it's the art of technology.
It's a good point. It's a good way to put it.
On the inside, it's the science of technology.
Gotcha.
How is technology enabling us to achieve our mission, but always rooted in facts and data?
And on your point about analytics and algorithms and data, TikTok obviously found this secret key that I think everyone's been like, oh my God, how did they do it? And what's going on? Obviously, TikTok, at least for me, and I think a lot of people here, exploded during COVID. And now like things like Reels and stuff, that all started there. It completely changed the way we consume content and how we, look at engaging content now. And we were talking just now off camera, it's not just about those first couple of seconds. You actually have to have interesting content. But before we dive into TikTok, one thing you talked about was you need to realize if you're a builder or an optimizer. Mm-hmm. And when you framed it like that, I'm like, I've never asked myself that question. But looking at your journey, it was always building in new regions, new markets, globally as well. But for someone who might be on the fence, be like, I don't know if I'm a builder or an optimizer, what are the questions I should be asking myself to get that answer? Because I think that would give a lot of people more direction on where they should go or what their strengths might be.
Okay, there's a lot of introspection that needs to happen. Ultimately, whether you're a builder or an optimizer, there's no right answer. It's not like, oh, you're a builder and therefore that's the right answer, or you're an optimizer, that's the right answer. It really boils down to what gives you energy. Where do you enjoy spending time and effort? And conversely, what drains you? What seeps energy from you? So I'm a builder at heart because I enjoy the messiness of we have to build. There's so many opportunities or permutations to what that build might look like. It's a green field. Let's be creative as to how we think about that. Versus maybe an optimization where it's like, okay, things are already sizable and we're tweaking things. We're looking at how we can squeeze more juice out of the same fruit as opposed to maybe exploring a different venture, a pivot, etc. So it really boils down to the type of person that you are and what gives you energy. In my case, I enjoy building. I enjoy the messiness and the uncertainty and the chaos and bringing structure to that.
Okay.
The consulting muscle really taught me the science of management. It gave me structure. It gave me strategic thinking. It gave me frameworks. Working on the digital side, we said it's rooted in facts and data. But there's also this romanticism of what's our mission? And therefore, what's the art of management, the creativity, the ingenuity, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal that we have? And I brought some of that to my entrepreneurial journey at Glambox, right? And so the combination of the science and art is what I'm bringing to the building side of the equation, to say it's scrappy, it's messy. You can be very creative in terms of how you're going to build, but I'm also bringing the structure and rigor of, okay, here's how we're going to think about this. Here are the frameworks. These are the very fact-based hypotheses that we want to prove or disprove, and then pivot from there if it's working or not.
And on the, I like how you distinguished, that there's an art to this, to your point, as you were saying earlier, very data-driven, science-driven. Yes, that's once you have the structure and the systems in place, but there's a creativity to bring sense to all that chaos. And clearly by you launching, even your journey as an entrepreneur, it's all about building, it's all about solving problems. How can we address this differently? But you get to a point that you're going to have to clean things up, tie it together, because otherwise it's not going to be able to scale and grow to the levels that you want to. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Look, you can have big, lofty, ambitious ideas, but then you need the structure and the facts to back it up. In fact, we have a term that I've heard used quite consistently at our company is pragmatic romanticism. You need to be romantic in your ambitions and the why not, we should try this, etc. But it needs to be rooted in pragmatism as well as to what are the immediate kind of steps I need to take to prove or disprove this big romantic idea. What's the structure and the strategic thinking I need to put behind that? So it is the art of romanticism and the science of being pragmatic.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'd love to touch on your entrepreneurial journey, because sometimes I think there's a disconnect a lot of people have. It's either I have to work in corporate, or I have to be an entrepreneur. And there's no world where I can dabble in this, go there, try it out, come back, and vice versa. And since you're a builder, I'm curious, what did the entrepreneurial experience teach you about building that you could have never experienced in a corporate structure?
Corporate brings fantastic rigor and structure and frameworks and resources. But it also operates with very, well-known policies and processes. So there are certain guardrails that you need to stay within when working in corporate. The startup world doesn't have any guardrails.
Yeah,
it
sure.
doesn't even have a paved road, right? You have to decide which path you're going to take. Are you going to pave this while you're driving on that road? Is it leading to a destination that you're interested in? Do you do a U-turn and go somewhere else? So while corporate is fantastic in terms of giving you this very structured thinking, it doesn't give you the ability to be really creative and really kind of embrace your ingenuity. Conversely, a startup, which can also be a challenge, it's a green field. You could go in any direction, which then creates a lot of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Hence why it's like, okay, what are you solving for? Let's root it back in some facts and structure. Yes, you can have that big lofty idea, but let's put some sort of guardrails that you can maybe move, expand, reduce, change. But there needs to be a general sense of this is the lanes that we're operating in, and not just go off-road all the time, because that might not lead you anywhere.
So when you were working, because we talked about how when there's no guardrails, it's a little bit different, and we talked about the systems and the technology behind it. I'm curious, because at all these, the big companies you've worked at, critical thinking and creativity is such a core thing behind, all the systems. But does each one have a different, I guess, philosophy of how we like to approach these things? Or is it kind of, we just want to bring the best people or the most diverse team to solve this specific issue?
I think the latter is quite a common trait across all of them.
Okay.
Ultimately boils down to, can we think like a startup, but in a corporate setting, right? So the agility that you have in a startup, it is almost by default pushed within the types of companies that I've worked in. How do we constantly stay relevant? How do we disrupt ourselves, or else the risk is someone else is going to come and disrupt us, right? And so that characteristic of keep driving big, audacious ideas, but always rooted in facts, is a common trait across all of them. They're all mission-led. They're all very clear on their value system, the principles by which they operate. They're also very clear on the type of people they want to bring on board. They want to bring people that have a protagonist mindset. They're not waiting necessarily to be told all the time what to do, but they're protagonists. They're taking a proactive approach to, hey, I see this challenge. I think there's a solution that I want to test out. And again, the guardrails are wide enough within those corporations, within these big digital giants, whereby you can do that. You can be creative. You can try new things. I think that's the secret sauce, the DNA of these big digital giants, where I think they've found the sweet spot between operating like a big corporation, the structure, the rigor, etc., with frameworks, but they also bring a startup mentality to all of that. Hey, be proactive, figure out what the big problems are, come up with solutions, try it out, learn from that if it doesn't work. It's okay, take that risk.
Yeah, you said
More traditional corporations, you tend to be a little bit more risk averse, right? Stick to my KPIs, because if I digress from that, if I move away and it doesn't work out, is someone going to hold me accountable for, you failed on this one, versus the mentality in the big giants that I've had the pleasure of working for. It's like, what did you learn from this? And how can we apply those learnings into improving towards our mission?
So on the, I love how you framed it as we want a startup mentality with a corporate structure. I think one of the challenges, no matter what, I think in the early days, because you talked about disruption. I think disruption is a very tricky thing, because I think you can fall in love too much with disruption. And there's a phase between disruption and disrupted. And in that phase, okay, you can experiment, whatever, just like all the big ones, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the guys who disrupted industries, but the idea was a disruption, but at the moment, you get to a stage and a scale that you can't continue to operate with this disruption mindset. That's what it looks to me from the outside. What's your perspective?
Look, disruption can mean many different things, right?
Okay.
It's not come up with a whole new paradigm on consumer shifts or a whole new business model. It can also mean micro disruptions. How are we doing things differently within the organization?
Okay.
Right? It's always with that mentality of what got us here is not going to get us there. Let's not get comfortable and complacent in what we're doing. Even if we're successful, you should always in the back of your mind go, okay, am I the best version of myself as a company? And even as an individual, and we can talk about that. And could I do things better or differently? So it doesn't necessarily need to always mean that big, lofty, oh, you need to come up with a whole new business model. Because what that then causes is that you jump onto every innovation for the sake of it. Not because it's rooted in, I believe this could be useful in enabling my mission. Right?
Yes.
There's examples of that. I'm not going to go into the details, but over the last, let's say, 5-7 years, there's been a whole slew of, shifts on paper. It's like, oh, we should invest in this or invest in that, and people are like, yeah, let's do it. Not realizing that it was, investing in a technology for the sake of it, as opposed to going back to, well, what is this addressing? What is this solving for? And how is this tech enabling our core mission versus falling in love with the idea of disruption just because it's beautiful and sexy. Yeah.
So I'm so happy you brought up that point, because now where my brain went when you were talking about that is AI, right? Everyone thinks like, I need to do something with AI. And I've had so many conversations on this podcast and many others about this conversation. And everyone just seems to your point, it's like this thing, I feel like I have to do it, but I don't really know what I want to solve it for. And every conversation I have, people are doing things that I'm like, I didn't know you could do that or do that, but you almost get spoiled for choice because your brain's like, I don't know what to do. And it comes back to the question that you've been asking from the beginning is, what am I solving for as your guideline to get there? But also, what you talked about with disruption, I think is very important, because from the outside, we think disruption has to be this massive game-changing scale thing rather than mini tweaks within small things that could later on have a much bigger impact down the line. But I think that's a very important distinction to make, because I think a lot of people forget about that. We get too drawn by the glamour and the awareness of it, right?
And to build on that last point as well, disruption doesn't need to only happen when things are not working out, right?
Great point.
Disruption should be embraced, especially when things are going well, because you can do it from a position of strength, right? You're not reacting to a situation. You're saying, let's not get complacent and comfortable. Let's not get pulled by the gravity of mediocrity.
Yeah.
And let's keep, one step ahead before it catches up with us. And then all of a sudden we're having to react to a situation, because then you're no longer in control. So disruption, even these micro disruptions, need to ideally be done all the time, whether you're reacting to some externality that you hadn't considered, or whether it's, hey, things are going well. How do I keep tweaking and doing these micro disruptions to ensure that they keep going well?
But I think, to your point, I'm so happy you brought this up, because I think this is the problem with AI, though. This is the threat. People are like, there's this threat, oh my God, in a couple of years, I'm going to be irrelevant. You know what I'm saying? So I need to be proactive about it so people want to be proactive, but without the correct reason to be proactive about it, because they fear down the line, being reactive and at the pace we're moving at is not going to work.
Look, we're in very interesting times.
Yeah.
Change has always been a constant, but the rate of change that we're going through today has accelerated exponentially. So it's only human nature to almost, I don't want to say panic, but say, I need to do something about this.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's important to stay grounded and go, okay, there's all of this happening externally. I understand some of it. I don't understand some other parts of it. What is it that I'm trying to do? And what role can technology play in enabling that? Technology in it for itself is not an innovation. It's how you apply technology that is the innovation, right? I'll give you a few examples. GPS has existed for decades, back in the 70s as well. It only became mainstream when the use case came through something like Google Maps, right? When people could see that it was an easy way of leveraging that technology. AI and neural networks, I studied that in university back in the 90s. Arguably it existed from the early 80s, late 70s, but it's only now over the last 2-3 years that has become mainstream with the use case of generative AI. So the technology in it for itself is not the innovation. It's how you use the technology that matters. And in today's kind of AI craze, my humble advice to anyone is, what is the biggest bottleneck or problem statement that you have today? Or conversely, the biggest opportunity you see in your line of business, and how can AI enable that?
Yeah.
Don't do AI for the sake of AI. Do AI because it's helping you address a core business challenge.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. The problem is AI is question 2, not question 1. Or in tech is question 2, not question 1.
Absolutely.
It always comes back to question 1, what problem do I want to solve and how do I want to use this? Now, I know you've worked, across the world, managed many diverse teams, and you talked about something in the podcast, which was the cultural quotient. I never heard of that before. Now people talk a lot about diversity. But I also think diversity is this I think it's been overused. I think I don't think people look at diversity in the right way. I think they look at it as a thing that I need to do to that, which helps, my brand, my whatever, rather than looking at it strategically and understanding the power of diversity of thought, culture, gender, whatever, So could you walk us through how have you approached that with, all the places that you've been working?
Yeah, absolutely. So the concept of cultural quotient, maybe we elaborate on that first.
Yeah, please.
And that was an aha moment when I was managing over 100 different countries, basically everything east and south of Greece. The more traditional lens on leadership is high IQ, high EQ, high intellectual quotient, high emotional quotient, right? And what I discovered is that there's a third axis, there's a third lens, which is the cultural quotient. So EQ gets you to potentially understand the specific person in front of you.
Sure.
CQ, cultural quotient, gets you to understand the people in a specific environment, right? What are their values? How do they operate? And it's not to stereotype, but there are certain norms and behaviors that that are broader than just the person that you're speaking to, but it's a representation of the of the people or the upbringing that they've had.
Exactly, yeah.
And so when you're operating in Japan versus Vietnam versus Australia versus the UAE, it is important to understand what that cultural quotient looks like. Now, what that enabled me to do when I had that aha moment is to lean in with curiosity. I'm like, okay, I don't have all the answers. I can't just assume. I have to ask questions. Always from a position of good intent as to what makes people tick, what's going to work, what's not going to work. And extrapolated even further, that helped me appreciate diversity of input. It's very easy, to your point, to say, oh, we have to champion diversity and inclusion because it looks great on a wall, amongst all the different values that I
Yes,
have.
exactly.
But there's a real strategic value add to diversity. It enables you to get out of your own echo chamber. If as a manager you're only hiring people who are like-minded because it's comfortable to you, you get one another, then it's a missed opportunity because you're surrounding yourself with people who think the same as you. They don't complement your thinking. And so diversity is effectively a very brave managerial behavior to say, I don't have all the answers. I probably haven't thought of all the different solutions and the impact that it has across different stakeholders that matter to my business, for example. I need to be courageous and bold in bringing people from different avenues of life, different cultures, different experiences, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, but I want to hear their opinion. I want to get their input because that's what's going to complement what I know and extrapolate that beyond the echo chamber that I'm in. And so that also brings the concept of inclusion, right? Diversity is, yes, I've invited everyone to the party, but inclusion is I'm going to proactively ask everyone to come dance as well. So as a leader, as a manager, how are you making sure that all the voices around the table, whether they're loud voices or soft voices, are being given the opportunity to be heard? Because that's the only true way you're going to get a more comprehensive, holistic input of different opinions that is ultimately going to help you shape your comprehensive strategy. So to me, that's the nuance. Diversity is giving you the insights that you didn't know you needed. But all of this, by the way, still needs to be rooted in a common set of beliefs, common sense of belonging.
Sure.
Again, if I take the digital giants that I've worked with, they've got a very clear purpose, a very clear set of principles that they operate by. And that's the common glue that we all abide by. And then you layer diversity and inclusion on top of that.
Yeah.
Right? We're all clear on what we're trying to do. The mission at TikTok is to inspire creativity and bring joy. Our values are very clear in terms of how we operate internally. And then you layer on top of that this quotient of diversity and inclusion to ensure that you're getting all the different inputs and perspectives required to deliver against that purpose and against those principles.
So on the point you mentioned, I love the analogy you gave. Diversity is inviting everyone to the party, inclusion is asking everyone to dance. I think that's such a great way to look at it. Also, to your point, it's very important for everyone to have a voice because if you are in your echo chamber, every idea I think in my head, if you're thinking the same thing, I'll be like, oh, we got this, great. We're geniuses over here. But I would love to, because I think one of the next question people will typically ask in this is like, Shant, that all sounds great. But then how do I measure the impact of diversity on my business? I think that is where, because the bottom line will show us the like benefits, whatever, but it's very difficult to link it because we have all these guys that we were able to do this. So would love to hear your perspective on that. And if you have a story that showcases from your experience why maybe an individual changed your mind completely and and it just gave you a whole new perspective. Because I think it'd be useful to give people more context on that.
Look, measuring the impact of diversity and inclusion is not the easiest thing. How do you attribute business growth or a breakthrough because of different perspectives? But I'll give you an example from the past that I think, while might not be measurable, but the impact was felt.
Sure.
So at Google, there used to be this concept of, I think there still is, the 20% concept. In other words, you can spend 20% of your time working on a project that hasn't been defined at a strategic level, but it builds towards the mission of the company, making information useful and accessible. So Gmail started that way. Gmail was some engineer at Google frustrated with some of the solutions, email solutions that existed at the time, and said, I'd like to find a way to make email more useful and accessible. And I'm going to work on that project, right? It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't part of a strategy that a leader defined somewhere. It wasn't a, folks, do we agree that we need to do this? Yes, let's do it. It was, you're given the opportunity to test something, to drive something from your opinion, right? Who would have thought that we needed to bring an element of search to email? But this individual thought, okay, that's our purpose, right? We want to make information useful and accessible to everyone. How do I deliver against that mission when it comes to email? And so invented Gmail on the back of that, right? Which is now a fantastic tool where you can search things and it finds things. It gives you the thread, the history, versus the way email was structured before. So that is, I think, an example of where a diverse way of thinking about a problem statement had an impact. Now, can you put it down to a very scientific measurement of these KPIs improved as a result of D&I? Most likely not. But is it the right thing to do when it comes to driving a growth strategy and having different perspectives and having an aha moment, like the one we just discussed, to say, let's build Gmail, even though no one had thought about it, you know, the person's manager or their manager's manager hadn't thought about it? I think that's a good example of where a different perspective had impact.
I never knew that Gmail story. It's crazy that someone just wanted to build for themselves is something now I think all of us around the world uses, one of the biggest, email platforms. And you talked about how through your journey you always wanted to be at the pinnacle of what was going on in the tech space. And now we're at the platform and attention economy, right? So obviously for a long time, people, even when social media just started, it took a while for it to break into the general public. Not the general public, but for businesses to start paying attention to this. I think there's always a hesitance, but people want to go if the attention's there. That's where I want to be. So, but I still think I have conversations with clients and with people that they're like, do we need a TikTok channel? Do we not? I'm like, guys, that's where it is. But I think there's still what's the word? Not a misconception, but there's a missing value link that they're not seeing. But since you've been working across, different platforms in those different times, where are we now? And how can businesses start leveraging platforms like TikTok to start actually driving value to their business?
I'll gladly give you a few examples, but maybe we root it in the big consumer shift that happened, because ultimately businesses go where consumers are.
Exactly.
Right? So if you look at the evolution of digital media over the last 20 years, we're arguably in the fourth phase of digital media. Late 90s, early 2000s, it was the era of the portals, right? You went to your favorite portal as a consumer on the internet, and you waited for an editor to post content there on a subject that you were interested in. You liked cars, you went to the car section. You liked finance, you went to the finance section of your favorite portals. That's how information was created and consumed. It was created by a few editors, right, experts, and it was consumed by folks who went to a specific property or platform or portal because that's where that content was being posted. It was a one-to-many, and it was one way.
Sure.
Editor to consumer. Then Google came along. Well, they made it mainstream, but the shift that happened was, well, sometimes I'm actively looking for information. I'm not waiting for an editor to post content. I want to find content. And that's the era of search, right? Information was made discoverable via search. And so that was evolution number 2. Evolution number 3 from a consumer perspective was, well, hang on a second, I don't always know what I'm looking for, right? I don't explicitly go and search for something. I also like to discover things. And in the real world, how do you discover things? Usually through word of mouth.
Yeah, very true.
Right? So a platform, social media came by and it said, we're going to create digital word of mouth. Friends and family and people that you follow, we're going to show you content from them to help you discover information that you didn't know about or that you might be interested in. And it also evolved from being one-to-many, editor to consumer. Every consumer started becoming a creator of content as well, albeit in their social circle. So it became a few-to-few type of connection. You would post something, if I was connected to you, I would read it and convert, and vice versa. That was the third phase. The fourth phase is arguably the one we're in today, which is the content evolution. So I no longer care what you're explicitly looking for. Search. I no longer just care what your friends and family in your echo chambers are posting about, social. I'm going to look at you as a consumer and ensure that I'm sharing content with you that is interesting to you and that you're passionate about and that meets the different personas that you are. So not me, Shant, as a late 40s male living in Dubai, interested in football, but me as a dad doing the drop-offs in the morning, me as an executive at lunchtime, me as a paddle player in the afternoon, me as a husband in the evening, watching something with my wife. Those are different personas, but the same person. And so content is now being presented according to those different personas. And also it's coming from so many different places. We've made, and I'd argue that TikTok is at the forefront of that, right? We've made it very easy to create content through state-of-the-art tools, through even AI at the core of it, and made it easy to link that content with who wants to consume it. And so when it comes to brands, they need to realize that's where consumers, that's the behaviors that their consumers have today. They're like, I no longer just want to look for things, or I'm no longer just interested in what my friends and family are talking about. I know there's a lot of content out there in the internet, and I want the algorithm, I want AI, to figure out what's relevant for me. So users are already on that journey, especially in this part of the world. It's a young, digital savvy, mobile first population.
Massive.
Early adopters of these types of things. And businesses, I think, to your point, are now leaning in. I mean, we've seen fantastic growth and phenomenal adoption of what we do. But what they're struggling with, and maybe this is where I can highlight a few examples, is, well, how do I present myself as a brand on TikTok, right? If content is king, if that's what people are coming to a platform like TikTok and all the other platforms that have emulated, let's say, this consumer shift of content first, how do I present myself as a brand on that platform? And it boils down to relevant content. We were discussing this earlier. Content that people genuinely want to consume. So if you're marketing a brand, you can no longer just put your marketing campaign on a platform with a very transactional message, buy this now, etc., and hope that the consumers, your audiences are going to say, oh, I love this, I'm going to buy it. There needs to be a two-way kind of interaction.
Exactly.
It needs to be rooted in what is the community of my consumers interested in today. And I'll give you a few examples where I've seen that come to life. So Burger King in Turkey wanted to have impact or wanted to drive sales when it came to ice cream in the summer. So they could have looked at this from a very typical kind of marketing funnel. We're going to launch an ice cream product. We're going to raise a lot of awareness, and hopefully people are going to come to the store to buy it. What they said instead was, hang on a second, let's get users to be our best advocates on this. So they started off with a grassroots campaign with creators to say, have you tried the latest ice cream milkshake hack that Burger King has? And then put it on the audience to say, you know what, go try it out and put your feelings about it. Start posting content about this. So they started farming effectively UGC about the product, about the ice cream in this case. And it went viral as a result, right? It wasn't this one-way marketing communication, we've got a new ice cream, buy it. It was like, hey, we've put this out there, who wants to try it? Let us know how you feel about it, back and forth. And then taking that content and using that as a marketing message, right, as an ad campaign. And they saw phenomenal growth. They saw 150% growth on sales when it came to ice cream. I think it had almost 60 million views in the country in terms of this hashtag related to their ice cream. And it created an 8% uplift in awareness that Burger King also sells ice cream. So the business impact was very real when they leaned into this community-first approach. So that's an example. On a broader level, Unilever, a couple of years ago, drove a global campaign across the community of people who love cleaning. There's a community on TikTok of cleaning aficionados, people who like to share their hacks on how cleaning is done at home, their tips and tricks and do's and don'ts. And Unilever said we want to participate in that conversation because we realize that's where cultural trends are being created. That's the community that seems to be really vested in what our products could potentially solve for. So they launched a whole movement around clean talk. And there was a combination of branded content. Here's how you can use our products. Here's a Sunday reset program. Every Sunday, have you tried these different cleaning solutions? But they also instigated the community to participate in that. What are your hacks? What are your do's and don'ts? What are the different ways? What irks you? What triggers you? What do you enjoy when it comes to cleaning? And they had billions of views as a result. And it also linked Unilever as a brand with that community of clean talk. So these are just two examples where brands moved away from the very transactional marketing funnel. I have a product, I want to raise awareness, I want to sell it, to how do I participate in a conversation with a community that really cares about the products that I have to sell, whether it was ice cream or cleaning products.
So I think you touched on lots of different things there. So first of all, you talked about how businesses can start using this, to launch their own campaigns or generate these communities. Now, communities I don't know what happened, Shant, over the last few years. Communities have exploded, both like here locally. I'm part of many, and I think TikTok is the digital version of the kind of stuff that I go to like in person. And to your point, you've made a very key distinction. It's a two-way conversation now. It's not, hey, buy this. It's like, hey, this is what you can do with this. Why don't you take a look for yourself? And also, you guys with content everyone kind of has to be like a movie director or a storyteller now. Even the average person that doesn't have like the crazy budgets and whatever. And you've seen over the last couple of years, especially like on TikTok, how it started off quite raw, like, just hold the phone like that, talk about something, whatever. And then it went through a phase that it got a little bit more polished, a little bit. And now it seems that vlogs and these kind of things are back on the rise. So the way even people are consuming content, they're not craving that polished thing. And TikTok is the platform for the authenticity.
Absolutely.
That's kind of how it comes across. So how have you guys, when it comes to the community aspect, do you guys take a look at this from a strategic perspective of how can we help people build their own communities, or where does the community part fit into like TikTok's like core?
Look, communities bubble up organically, right? The cultural trends and the zeitgeist, it's people who create that. It's not platforms.
True.
Right?
True.
They live on platforms or they scale on platforms. But trends happen because like-minded people come together. An example that comes to mind is during the Tokyo Olympics back in 2022, right? More people ended up watching the behind the scenes of the Olympics on TikTok rather than the Olympics themselves. that wasn't by design. It was rooted in the curiosity that people have to say, okay, well, what's a day in a life of an athlete like? What does the Olympic Village look like? What do they eat? Where do they sleep? And because content creation has become so easy now through the various tools that we have and many others bring to the table, anyone can become a creator. And as a result, that's a democratization of content creation. It's no longer reliant on an editor with a big camera crew, etc., and a storyline. Anyone can effectively say, you know what, I'm going to just take my phone and talk about this. And if there's enough like-minded people, then that's when something starts becoming trendy. So I don't know that we intentionally are fueling any specific community.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're a platform where the value system of those on it is very much about I want authentic, real content. I want you to understand that I have different personas, as I discussed earlier. And if there's content that meets the needs of my persona, I will consume it. And the algorithm does a beautiful job in finding that content for you and making you realize that actually I didn't even know that I was this persona,
Yeah.
right? But I've discovered a new content category. I'll give you my own shared experience. Over the years, I get more and more content around car restorations and watch restorations and DIY projects. Not because I actively looked for that or because the friends and family that I'm connected to are also passionate about that. But the algorithm was smart enough to figure out what I may enjoy based on what kind of content I'm consuming today or what type of content I'm creating today. And it started showing me those types of videos. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I've discovered a new content category, a new persona within me that I wasn't aware of before. Mm. And if enough people discover something like that, then a new community could be created around that, whether it's pet talk, clean talk, book talk, fin talk, car talk. There's so many different sub-communities that are being created.
And to your point, what always blows my mind is the speed. I could get that first video that's not within Khalid's persona that comes in. Even if I don't finish the video and I just have watched it for a bit, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm interested. A couple of videos later, it's going to send me something different to be like, are you sure? Do you like this? Do you not like this? And I think the speed is what's crazy to me. And you guys have cracked an algorithm that I think the whole world has been trying to figure out, how does it work? Because it's so relevant to the person. It's so personalized. Sometimes it blows my mind when my wife and I will be sitting, we're both on TikTok, and I'm looking at what she's watching, I'm looking at what I'm like, how are we on the same platform here? It's really, really crazy.
Highly personalized, absolutely.
And also the engagement is a very key part of that. We talked about the storytelling and so on, but I think the engagement is people are craving authenticity, to your point, but and I think why that's working is I want to see something of myself in this person.
Absolutely.
I'm like, oh, he has that problem, I have that problem. Or you like this, I like this too. So on the engagement aspect, because this is something that people are really drive from a business perspective, how do you guys approach the engagement conversation?
Look, let's look at it from a business perspective.
Sure.
Brands, you're speaking at how quickly these trends evolve, content categories emerge. So it's important for brands to be at the forefront of that. If they want to be relevant with their consumers, they need to understand the insights. They need to get a feel of what's brewing on the platform and then genuinely figure out, do I have a role to play in this? Can I participate in this conversation or not? So it really, first and foremost, boils down to insights, right? And so we have tools for that.
Yeah.
The latest tool that we've launched for businesses themselves is called Market Scope. It gives you a view on trends, insights, mentions, and all sorts of other things that help you understand what are the different audiences that could be interested in your brand and where are they in their awareness, consideration, conversion, the marketing funnel.
Sure.
So that becomes a very valuable tool for brands not to navigate in the dark and say, I'm going to put this marketing message out and fingers crossed, I hope it lands. It's rooted in insights. And I'll give you an example of a brand that leveraged that very successfully here quite recently. KFC. If you like KFC, they haven't changed their ingredients in 40 plus years. It's kind of the secret sauce. It's 11 different spices. They never told you what the spices are. But they realized that in Saudi Arabia, there was this organic movement to add additional spices to your KFC. And they collaborated with a very well-known creator, Badr, in Saudi, who had created her own spice. Because they noticed that was kind of the 12th spice being added to KFC. So it was very much rooted in insights. They're like, okay, here's what we stand for, but how are people actually consuming my products? What are the insights that I can gather from what they're posting? Because everyone's posting content, look at what I added to my KFC, etc. They said, how can we participate in that conversation? And they did this collaboration with Badr. And again, they drove this activation of user-generated content to say, go to your favorite KFC, buy the bucket, the burger, whatever else, and feel free to add the spice and post about it. So it created virality around that. Huge uplift in sales. But all of this to say it was rooted in insights. It wasn't I just want to jump onto a trend and, or I want to create I get asked a lot, how do I go viral? Well, it's rooted in the science of what are people talking about on the platform, and do you have a role to play in that story?
Yeah.
I think this is where brands need to kind of go back to the essence of marketing, right? Over the last 10, 15 years, they've been doing primarily media distribution. I have a campaign. I just want to put it on different media platforms, target the right people at the best cost, and what kind of return on ad spend am I getting? But it goes back to, okay, what are the insights that I'm building a campaign around, and how good is the content that I'm putting out there? Or more importantly, let me get out of the way of the community and have them talk about my brand.
Yeah.
And because that's going to come across as the most genuine and impactful as well.
True.
So that's how you really kind of create engagement. It's not about the algorithm and how does it work, etc. It boils down to, am I building content that the community finds relevant?
Exactly. And I've spoken to, over the years, some of the biggest TikTok creators, and I've always asked them, the question that you've been asked, how do I go viral? And no one has the answer. Everyone tells you, Khaled, there's no formula for this. You can't predict when all these, to your point, like-minded people are going to come together on this random trend, like the famous, ocean spray on the skateboard thing. Like, who would have thought that would go viral? Why did it go viral? You can try to science it as much as you can, but some things are just not measurable. In terms of like a system, he did this and that's why, and da-da-da-da. Maybe it was the time, maybe it was the brand, maybe it was like the song, like you have no idea. And one thing they've always told me is, to your point, for brands, you need to have your finger on the pulse, right? You need to know what's going on in the market, what's trending, and the advice I was given is don't scroll on TikTok to scroll on TikTok. Scroll on TikTok to analyze why is Khaled or you, why am I watching this video right now? What was in the hook? What happened like later on? What content is this that I'm still here and still consuming it? But I think people sometimes get too locked into we got this many views and whatever. But what my wife does, which I don't do this, but I understand the benefits of it. She won't just watch the video, she'll spend time in the comments. Not commenting, but seeing what are people saying, because that's the secret sauce right there. So no matter how many views, what are people talking about this? And then that's like your key to know what creator to work with, what brand to promote, and so on. But I think there's a misconception.
Yeah, that's a layer further of what insights am I gathering from this video. So when I have conversations with CEOs of brands, like, how do I need to think about TikTok? I'm like, put your consumer hat on, right? How are you consuming content? What's resonating with you and why? And then how can you apply those learnings to your brand messaging? Do you have a role to play in that or not? I think we're finally going back to that essence of marketing versus just media distribution.
And I wanted to definitely touch on, to round off this part of the conversation, on TikTok Shop and live shopping. This is a industry that has exploded, especially say in the last year or two. It's really, really started to pick up. And my question is, I would have never myself thought of a platform like TikTok, which I go to for, I guess, entertainment and so on, to become Now there's another layer. I can't just be entertained. I can start actually purchasing products that are linked to that entertainment. So could you tell us from your perspective, how has this grown? Why has this grown? And because I think this is the next big thing over the next couple of years.
Look, it's a natural next step of what we're discussing, whereby content is the hook. And then people are saying, well, I love this content. I like what the brand represents within that content. How do I get my hands on that brand, right? So it's content that leads to commerce.
Mm-hmm.
But it also builds on the consumer behavior shift that we were discussing, where people don't just want a transactional relationship with brands, they want an experiential relationship. Let's look at it from the lens of what we experience here in the UAE.
Sure.
We go to malls not with the intent of buying something. More often than not is just to walk around, experience something new, be exposed to different things, etc. So that's real content, right? That might end up in a commercial outcome. It might end up, oh, I like this, I want to buy it. Or we'll interact with a sales advisor and we learn something new and we end up buying. So the experiential component of shopping has existed in the real world, especially here, for a while now.
Yeah.
E-commerce is now catching up to that. E-commerce 1.0 was very transactional, very functional. I need this, I want it, it's the cheapest cost, biggest variety, I get it conveniently, tap, 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 I get it. Now it's like, no, I want experiential commerce. I want shoppertainment. Entertain me, engage with me, educate me, excite me about a product. And if I really enjoyed it, I might end up buying. So that's the concept of shoppertainment. It's more experiential. It's e-commerce 2.0. Mm. And what live shopping enables is, again, that two-way real-time communication and conversation. It feels like you're conversing with a sales advisor or with a group of friends when you're at the mall. Should I buy this? Should I not? What's so special about it? Do you have it in a different color, etc.? That's what live shopping brings to the e-commerce world that we already get to experience in the physical world. Mm. So it's a huge movement. You're absolutely right. It's caught Asia Pacific by storm. It's very real even in this part of the world because people want entertaining content that leads to shopping outcomes. Mm. They subscribe to this idea of shoppertainment.
And so you guys saw that trend. Was it a challenge? Because I feel like you're adding another very significant layer to a vertical, to the business. I don't know if maybe from a tech perspective, resources perspective, was it something that happened organically, or was this something you guys had been planning for a while?
I don't know the backstory of how we got to this, right? But today the way it manifests itself is you've got short form video content, right? Mm-hmm. The more typical TikTok that you might see on a For You page with everything that we've discussed. But content can also take the form of live, right?
True.
So you can go and watch a creator live stream
That's
content.
why streaming has exploded now.
Huge, right? Watching your favorite gamer play or your favorite cook a meal. And what live enables you to do that maybe short form content is a little bit more clunky is that two-way real-time interaction. Yes. So your wife going into the comment section of a short form video is, I want to see what kind of interactions happen there. Live is making that frictionless. Mm. You're being able to see that interaction real time without having to go into the content section of things and the commentary. You're seeing that real time, and the creators responding real time as well.
So you're getting that instant feedback too.
It's frictionless.
Exactly, yeah.
And so what that's also brought to the e-commerce world is removed friction. It's seamless. Mm. I saw a piece of content, I like it, I want to buy it. Let me buy it directly on the platform where I saw that piece of content, TikTok Shop.
And if I have the chance to interact live with this creator that I like, it also builds a certain builds a deeper loyal customer base, for myself or for that brand and so on, because I can answer your questions in real time. I can give you different options. We can have a debate. So it really does create, to your point, that two-way authentic engagement, which I think has been the underpinning of our entire conversation today.
Yes.
Now, I know you did some work with initiatives with Saudi Arabia, with the 2030 vision and so on. So I'd love to hear. So we've talked about how creators are using TikTok, for example. We've talked now about companies. What about on a national level? Do we have to do the same things we've been talking about apply, or is there a different hat we need to put on when looking at a national strategy, for example?
When it comes to like social
Yeah.
media and content creation.
Yeah.
I'd argue that this part of the world, the public sector has really leaned into, you know, TikTok and other platforms that are part of the content economy. You know, you see it here. There's a whole creator economy that is being actively pursued with the 1 billion follower summit and all of the legislation around that. And then the way governments or public sector shows up on a platform like ours, I'd argue that actually sometimes they're at the forefront of it versus private brands.
Interesting.
You know, I'll give you an example that we did a few years ago with the UAE media office. It was called The Coolest Winter, right?
Okay.
It was a campaign run rationally to talk about all the best spots across the UAE for someone to spend winter in, right? It's where the UAE is where the coolest winter happens. And so again, users were leaning in. It was instigated by, you know, a government campaign, but then it was supercharged by the user communities. Like, why don't you post where you like going and experiencing the winter in the UAE? So that's an example of where governments really leaned into understanding that this two-way interaction with a very kind of community-led approach works very well. But on a broader level, you know, if I think about my experience having worked in consulting as well back in the day and helping these big government transformation agendas around digital economy, I think we're blessed to live in a part of the world where there is an active effort by government, by public sector, to say, how do we stay at the forefront of digitization, and how do we leverage digital to enable our constituents, right? Whether it's citizens and residents, whether it's businesses, whether it's creators, whether it's you know, other government entities and employees. The governments here have always been very good at driving digital transformation agendas for themselves. And private sector, I think, is catching up with all of that. You know, digital transformation accelerated in the COVID years because they had no other choice. But governments have done a much better job at embracing you know, digital innovation for a longer period of time.
No, that's actually a very interesting example. And one thing I've really picked up in this conversation is it's not just about, you know, there's a lot of people like, oh, I want to create content, but I don't know what to create about. But to your point, there's so many stories you have is, let's come up with an idea and let's ask people for their opinion. Let's bring them in on this, which just, and if everyone's on board, that's just going to move the needle further, you know, so much faster.
Absolutely.
Shant, to round off our conversation today, I've just got 2 more questions for you. Now, what I'm solving for is a question that you consistently ask yourself. But I think it sounds like a simple question, but it really isn't. Because I think a lot of people were always torn between, do I go left or do I go right? So if there's someone out there who's like trying to find clarity, because I think that question helps give you some clarity, what advice would you have for them to answer that question?
Oh, that's a tough one. The way I've looked at it is doing a lot of introspection as to what matters to me in that specific moment. When I'm making a decision, I'm not thinking of my own ego. I'm not thinking about society's expectations of me, my friends and family, and what would they think about this. Because then you're not solving for the right things. At least that's my perspective. What am I solving for is, you know, very much rooted in solving for myself. Because if you're solving for yourself, then you're the best version of yourself. And then you show up better for all those around you, your friends, your family, society at large. So I know it's a little philosophical, but ultimately what I'm solving for is never what are people going to think about me, or does this seem the right decision for the perception my parents are going to have of me, or is this the right thing to do? Right by which standard? By whose standard?
Great point.
And so it really boils down to what matters to me in this specific moment. And I'll give a very candid and real, vulnerable example from my perspective. when I ran my startup, we also had our daughter that same year. And I've mentioned this before, I'm very proud of my daughter. She has additional needs. She's a person of determination. And I subscribe to that, to the use of that word, determination. Breaking glass ceilings was a determination that I haven't seen in many people. But it also meant that I couldn't run a startup while having to think about taking care of her. Because a startup is, all-encompassing. It requires a lot. Financial stability is not there. 24/7, you're switched on thinking about your startup. So to me, it's like having two babies, a startup and a real one to manage.
Basically, yeah.
So I had to go back to corporate. Not because that was part of the plan, but because what I was solving for was I need the stability to take care of my daughter. From an ego perspective, if I had thought of the external factors of like, what are people going to think, that I failed in running my startup, or that I gave up on it, etc. But I'm like, that doesn't matter. What matters to me right now is that I need to be there for my daughter and make sure that I'm providing and protecting her. And therefore, I'm okay to go back to corporate and keep my head up high and say, this is why I need another corporate job. And it's okay that I'm having to step away from my startup. That wasn't the dream, but that's the reality that I had to solve for at the time. So that's maybe an example, a shared experience from my perspective, where I was looking deep within as opposed to being distracted by what everybody else expects of me.
Well, first of all, I appreciate and thank you for being so vulnerable with us. That is not an easy story to share, and I'm sure. But to your point, I think it clearly signifies what you're talking about of what am I solving for myself, regardless of, to your point, what people are going to think, going back to corporate, all that. You had a very clear purpose of this is why I'm doing this decision. And me, as Shant, whatever, as Khaled, I'm comfortable with this and I can live with this and I know I'm doing it for the reasons that are right for me. And to round off our conversation, Shant, our message with this podcast is that success comes in many forms and learning never stops. So I always believe throughout your career, we learn every day. But there's always, because I just reflected on my experience, there's always a learning that comes up along that journey that I like to call the game changer learning that really just shatters the ceiling, breaks it, and you see life, love, work, relationships, just things in a completely different way. If I had to ask you what that game changer learning was for you, what would you say?
What a great question. So I usually subscribe to the concept of continuous learning. So micro-learning as opposed to this big bang aha moment. Everyday interactions, being exposed with curiosity to different things, you learn something new about yourself and more broadly. So learning doesn't need to be only, I'm going to take a break now and I'm going to go back to school, right? Every day is a learning opportunity. But if I were to think about your question of did I have one major breakthrough that really shaped me, probably has to do with becoming a parent. Because all of a sudden, you learn things about yourself that you didn't know of before. So I learned patience as a result of my daughter's situation. I learned that plans are great on paper, but then something major happens and you got to throw that plan out and come up with something new. I learned to be a lot more grounded on what I can control. Certain things are beyond my control. So whereas before I'm like, I'd maybe get angry about a situation. I'm like, okay, so why is it being happened? Now I'm like, you know what, there's maybe a greater reason why this has happened. Let me take the learnings from it and make the most of that situation. So probably becoming a parent has been the single biggest kind of transformation on my side because you're dealing with an emotional side. It's not a rational business conversation with your children. You're helping shape them up into what their best version of themselves could be. And you're learning along the way a little bit more about yourself and maybe tweaking some of the things that were part of your character and saying, actually, maybe there's a different way of doing that. So micro learning all the time, continuous learning, but maybe the single largest, change was being a parent.
Well, to your point, first of all, on the parent side, it's something I've heard many people share with us, on the podcast. I don't have kids yet, so I can't, jump in on that. I have my own perspective, and I think I'm overthinking things a little bit too much. But coming back to what you said about micro learning, I think that is the most important thing. I always, personally, I'm like, I wish I had the mindset I have now when I was younger. It took a while to get me to a stage that I just want to learn. And that's why, I'm so blessed and honored to do this podcast and sit with amazing people like you, because it's just this all the time, which is fantastic.
Lucky you.
All of these conversations, just to your point, just like how you can learn every day, have helped shape me and shape, everything I've done as well. Shant, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. This was such a fun conversation. It was really interesting to hear your perspective on content, the conversation, the authenticity. Underlying all the tech stuff behind it, there's a real human touch and human element that underlines all this, because without this, all that other stuff probably wouldn't work anyway.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. This has been an enjoyable experience.
Thank you very much. Guys, to everyone listening, thank you so much, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care.